Good morning, and welcome to the last day of our Highway School Good Roads Week. I'm David Orr. I'm the director here at the New York State LTAP Center, the Cornell Local Roads Program. I want to welcome you to our last day. Hope you've enjoyed the time that we're having here. So, before we do anything else with the program, if you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And I'm going to just do a quick welcome, and then I'm going to get started with our little tailgate talk. I want to thank everybody who's joined us all week long. Uh, it's not our first choice to not be at the place that's behind me. Uh, this, if you don't recognize it, is the Emerson Suites Phillips Hall, where we have held the highway school for many, many years. We will be back, and at the end of this morning, we'll have a slide showing you the dates. So you can write them down. It's the first week in June, as you might expect, 2022. And we certainly plan to be up as a college to have everybody up there and have a celebration with, which will be our 75th in person highway school. We have a nice program today, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen and make sure I get the right one. Boop. There we go. Technology works. Again, like all of us, we're having to be flexible, move things around. I had hoped to do this from our laboratory that's in our building, but I'm fighting with my computer, and so I thought I'd better to have everything work as well as possible. So this morning, I want to talk a little bit about culvert design and installation. We're going to start with culvert design. I'm going to show you a technique that works for 90% of the culverts that are out there. And even with the changes and additional flow, it's still a good technique. You still should be using it to check all your designs. But if there's concerns, as we'll talk, get some help. A lot of this information is available in our roadway and roadside drainage workbook. You can download it. It's there listed on the screen, and it's going to magically show up in the chat here in just a second. Okay. In fact, I've opened my chat pod up so I can see it. If you have any questions as I'm doing this, please put them in the Q&A and I'll try to answer them as we go along. But essentially, it's a fairly quick technique to make sure your culverts are properly sized. It's really useful if you're putting a new driveway in. Now, why does this technique work? Well, it works because, let's be honest, most of our culverts are already in place. 90% or more are already in the ground and they're already in place. And most of the time, we're just replacing an existing culvert pipe. So from that standpoint, it works pretty well. If we imagine we've got ourselves a nice road network here, and we'll draw some roads here. We'll draw just a simple grid, and then we'll come in here and we'll get a different color. Oh, let's go with blue today. And then we'll come over here. We got ourselves a stream, and maybe it intersects here and then goes underneath our road like that. And maybe we have a ditch line that runs here. Okay. So, our streams are already in place, our ditches and roads are already in place. And so there's really two choices that come into play at that particular point. One possibility that happens quite often is we've got ourselves, maybe we've got a house here, and we've got another house here, and we want to put a new house here in the middle. Okay? So someone's come in and they want a new driveway, and it's between two existing driveways. That's actually the easiest one. Happens all the time. The other possibility is that you've got to have a situation where you've got to be replacing an existing culvert pipe. You're worried, is it big enough? You're just trying to figure out what do I need to do to make sure that pipe can adequately handle what's going on around it. In that particular case, maybe it's this culvert here that's sort of the end of where our ditch comes in. Okay. So this technique works because it's measuring what's actually in the field. In fact, when I found that there's an issue between what I'm going to show you here and what actually a computer might tell you, I usually trust what I'm going to show you. This is a field technique. And what you've got to do is you got to go upstream and measure the pipes upstream. And you got to go downstream and measure the pipes downstream. And that's true, by the way, even for our driveway. And you're going to put a pipe in that's between the two. Now, what is it that we need? I mean, if you think about it, what we're really trying to focus on is what do we need at the end of the day? Well, at the end of the day, we're going to need to know the size of our pipe, which is really the area of the pipe. We need to know the material that we're going to use. And of course, is there a different shape? Is it just going to be round, which is the most common, or some squashed pipe or an arch or something like that? We need to know the length. Okay, that's pretty important. And we may want to think a little bit about the inlet and the outlet. Okay, so these are the things that we need to know. Okay, so it's simple. You go out to where you're going to be putting in your driveway or you're replacing your culvert pipe, and you go and you measure the upstream pipe and you calculate its area. And then you go downstream, you measure the downstream pipe. And if the upstream pipe, as in these pictures, say the upstream pipe is 12 inches and the downstream pipe is 30 inches, you're going to put a pipe in between those two in terms of size. So if you're real close to upstream, maybe it's in 12-inch or 18-inch. As you get closer to the downstream, you're thinking about 24 or even 30 inches, sometimes the same size, but always go same size or larger as you go downstream. Okay, it's pretty simple. And then you look at the site. Now, if you're brand new driveway, you're probably going to put a round pipe in between two round pipes, no big deal. But in the case of, say, you're replacing an existing pipe, it tells you a lot what's going on. So you go out and you investigate, knock on some doors, talk to the people who live there. In this particular case, you can see this is a pipe arch, and it's not in great shape. It's already rusting, and when we replaced it, it was only 10 years old. So metal pipe that only lasts for 10 years, I'm not going to put back in a corrugated metal pipe. Okay. But I can't put plastic in because plastic only comes in one shape, round. So really, I'm probably going to wind up having to put in either concrete or some kind of arch system in this particular case. When it comes to deciding what the shape is, a lot of times we're dealing with ditches. And if you're dealing with a ditch, what you're really looking at is you've got a ditch like that. You want to put a driveway with a swale in it so that the water doesn't flow in the road. And I'm going to put my pipe inside that ditch line. Do I have enough cover over the top of the pipe so I don't break it down? I'll show you that before we're done here. The minimum cover that you need in every single case, by the way, is 1 foot if it's properly put in. Okay, so do I have that? If not, then I got to think about either putting in a different shape, or you could even bury the pipe. People sometimes do that, and they bury the pipe a little bit. But remember, if you do that, the the pipe area is reduced because it's the area of between the pipe and above the streamline that you got to calculate. Now, the Army Corps actually likes that. It's good environmentally. There's lots of reasons, bank to bank, that kind of stuff you may have heard about. But remember, it's the area. So we've got our material, we've got our shape, we've got our size. All that's left is to how much pipe and what's the alignment, and do we do something at the ends? Well, the shortest is always perpendicular, and that's easy, less pipe, but almost always you want to go with the natural alignment. Go with whatever the stream is telling you. Don't go off in some odd direction. All you do is create an odd erosion problem. Okay? And let the pipe tell you what's going on. Again, a 10-year-old pipe with rust probably didn't have something going on with bed load, or there was something going on with the pH of the soil. Pick the right material that's going to last, because you want it to be in the ground 35, 50 years at least. And all of the materials will work. You just might have to increase the gauge for metal pipe or coat it with asphalt or polymer or concrete. Keep that in mind. And of course, everybody thinks shorter pipe is good, is cheaper, but by the time you pay for the extra scour protection that you need here and here and here, the cost differential isn't that much. The better alignment almost always is over here. Go with the natural flow whenever you can. Now, again, not 100%. This is the 90% rule, but it's a good check on everything that we're doing. This is the pipe we put in, concrete. It's in good shape, and it's holding up just fine. That rule of thumb works. And if you're going, well, Dave, that's a picture you took many years ago. It's an old pipe. Well, that's good news, actually. But here's one I found actually when I was up in Wyndham. I was out for my evening walk, and here exactly is what we're talking about. Wyndham had a driveway upstream that was smaller, a driveway that was downstream that was bigger, and here's the pipe in between the two. In terms of the ends, Gary and company, they put in a special end because they were concerned about erosion or aesthetics or safety. These things are actually pretty good from a safety standpoint. So again, we choose the ends for other reasons. Now you're probably wondering, can I use this for multiple pipes like we showed in the drawing? Absolutely. This technique works with multiple pipes. But I will tell you, if you have a multiple pipe situation, go get some help from Soil and Water, County Highway Department, neighboring town, consulting engineer, give us a holler. But this technique is still a good one to check everything. So you go out and you measure the pipes, get their diameters, and you calculate their area. To calculate the area, you could do it this way. You could go pi r squared. Remember that? Area is equal to pi r squared. Or you could actually just look it up. A lot of the manufacturers will tell you the area for a given diameter. Okay? Calculate all the areas, add them all up, and there's your minimum square footage, 24.5 square feet. The existing pipe in this case only had a 12.6 square foot opening, and guess what? It's leaded every single year. You're tempted, I know sometimes, 66 inches close, but remember, there is additional watershed, and you have to realize that there's additional watershed to deal with. So, this might be a few acres, it might be a lot of acreage, but you got to deal with that extra watershed that's in this space right here. So always go larger, never go smaller. So 72-inch would be the minimum. And again, multiple pipes, get some help. In this particular case, it turns out we needed a little bit more than that. Okay. So that's a simple rule of thumb. And I can tell you right now, it doesn't take very long and can save you a lot of trouble. And while you're doing it, make sure you talk to the neighbors that everything's working just fine, that you're in pretty good shape. Okay. Now, what I want to finish with is culvert installation. Again, I was hoping to do this from the lab, but instead we're going to go back. We actually have this on our website. You can watch this video. Okay. As soon as my computer decides it wants to wake up. And I'm going to discard that. And you don't need to see my schedule. And this is a demo that we did on culvert installation using a potato chip can that should illustrate the issues for any time you're installing flexible and even concrete pipe.
Okay, in this demonstration we're actually going to build a culvert pipe out of a can of potato chips. This can of potato chips is an awful lot like flexible culvert pipes made of plastic or corrugated metals. Obviously not strong enough to support my weight, but if we backfill them properly, it will support my weight, same way that a culvert pipe will support the weight of a dump truck. We're going to be installing in our trench box here, which has some plastic on the ends just so we can see what's going on, but normally it would be open on both ends. First thing we need to do is put a little gravel in to bed the pipe, and it needs to have the right amount of moisture in it. It needs to be non-frost susceptible. This is obviously too dry. It doesn't have any moisture in it at all, so we need to add some moisture. Well, how much moisture we add can be calculated, but as a good rule of thumb, you want to have enough moisture in it where it will hold a cast, but not so much moisture that when you squeeze it, it comes off on your hand. So now we've added some water to it, and we squeeze, and as you can see, it's just starting to hold a cast, and there's not water coming off on my hands. Okay, so that's pretty good. Again, we could test for this in the lab, and there are tests that we recommend people do, but as a minimum, would you at least give the gravel a little bit of a squeeze? So now we're going to put some gravel into our bed. In the field, normally we'd be putting how thick? Well, 6 inches. Thinner is better. Too thick, and you can't get compaction. Too thin, and just takes you too long. So normal rule of thumb is about 6 inches. Here we're going to be putting just very thin lifts because it's a demo. This is my little compaction tool. There's two types of compactors we use. We use a jumping jack, we can use a vibrating plate tamp. And there are lots of debates about which is better. The reality is, if you'll keep the lift thickness thin, it doesn't really matter. Both will work just fine. In this case, I'm not pressing hard, I'm just letting gravity do the work. Now I put in a second lift to gravel. I'm slightly above my final elevation for my pipe. I'm not doing that because I'm worried about the pipe settling. I'm doing that to provide a place for me to lay my pipe in as a haunch. What I'm going to do is dig out a little bit of a space to do that, and I need something the same shape as my pipe. In this case, my little tool does that. But in the real world, you could use a collar for your pipe. That works just fine. It's a great template to set the shape of your pipe. Now we're going to put it in. What that haunch does for me is it gives me a place, holds the pipe in place while I'm doing the rest of the work, and actually helps get material underneath so you don't get a void underneath there. So now I'm going to come up. I need to bring my lifts up on both sides evenly. Again, keeping my lift thickness thin. Question we get asked all the time is how wide should the trench be? And there's calculations and all kind of rules of thumb people use, but the easiest is you need enough room for the pipe plus the compactor on both sides. So it's just as wide as your compactor on each side plus the pipe. That's it, nothing more. When I get to the top of the pipe, I actually come up above before I compact along the top. I do that for two reasons. One, I don't want to damage the pipe by hitting it with the compactor directly. And two, by compacting across the sides up a little bit, when I do go across the top, it provides a little more lateral support, helps hold everything in place. Now normally we'd like to have a minimum of 12 inches of cover over the top of the pipe. But if you compact it well, you can get away with a little less. In this case, in the demo, we're only going to have an inch or two. That's all there is to it. This will now support my weight. And you can see it's nice and round, so let's put it down on the ground here. I'm going to put a piece of wood. Main reason I do that is I don't want to point load it. Normally we want to have a foot of cover over any pipe that's under a roadway because it's the weight of a truck. In this case, we've only got an inch or two. And as you can see, it supports my weight just fine. No issues at all. Let's see how our pipe did. Supports my weight, and the pipe is still nice and round. That's all there is.
So that's it. If you can do those techniques to check your design, install it properly, it'll last longer, it'll hold up better against storms. And again, those rules of thumb work 90% plus. So they're really useful. Any questions about that for culvert design and installation? I don't see anything in the Q&A. You did see I had my coffee cup. It's all ready to go. But okay, no questions. So thank you. I hope you got something out of that. And we're going to now throw it over to Jeff Scott, our technical assistance engineer, who's down in Dickinson with Joel Kai and Nick Kuzmic behind the scenes to talk a little bit about, I do have a question real quick before I throw it there. Can you realign the corrugated pipes easily? You can move them around. In fact, that's actually one of the flex issues you have to be careful about is when you're installing them. They tend to want to move, especially the plastic ones. That's why I really like that haunch that I put in. It not only reduces the stress underneath, but it keeps it from wandering on us. Set your alignment, spend the time to do that, put it in that haunch, and then it doesn't move at all unless you over compact it. Okay. Now, somebody wants to know about relining pipes versus replacing. I'm a huge fan of that. Uh, Relining your pipes can be done by sleeving it and filling the void with either grout or flowable fill. There's companies that sell devices that get put in and either heat injected or steam injected or cure in place. There's companies that will sleeve it with large sections if you want to replace a small box culvert. Guess what? Those techniques all work, but the first rule is to check that design using the technique we talked about earlier. In other words, go upstream, measure the area, go downstream, measure the area, and what's your new pipe going to give you in terms of area? If it's marginal, go get some help. Go get an engineer, go find somebody to help with the calculations. It doesn't take that much time. Okay? And if you want more information on lining, let us know. We can get some stuff to you. Okay, now I'm going to throw it over to our friends in Binghamton, town of Dickinson. So take it away, Jeff and company, and hopefully we'll talk to you later on.
We're hot.
We're hot. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Scott, Technical Assistance Engineer for Cornell Local Roads, New York's LTAP Center. I'd like to introduce Joel Kai, Highway Superintendent for the town of Dickinson and past president of the Town Superintendents Association, 2019 to 2020.
Yeah, COVID 2020. Hey, David Run, quick comment. I know the town of Denmark was the snow capital of the world, but I was amazed in our last video there, your presentation, you still had snow in the background. So
that video was taken about 4 or 5 years ago.
that was very interesting. Anyhow, Jeff and I are going to do a how to set up a traffic
Work zone.
And we're going to go through the different parts of that. And we had a little mock thing that we were going to do where a phone call comes in and I answer the phone and I turn to the guys and say, okay, you guys know what we got to go set up a work zone. You guys know what you need to do. And the two guys run out the door with a pair of cones. And that obviously is not the way you're supposed to do it. But oftentimes that's exactly what we do as highway superintendents. We don't take the time to explain what we should be doing. So with that, Jeff's going to help me here. We're going to set up a little drawing of what you're supposed to do, and then we're actually going to do it. So Jeff.
All right. So if you're not totally aware of what we need to do, we do offer this work zone safety flip guide, which kind of goes through all the steps of everything related to a work zone, including the type of traffic control devices, dealing with pedestrians, channelizing, spacing of signs, and we'll touch on that as we kind of go through here. So what we want to do is walk through the different parts of the work zone, and we'll go to the work zone flip guide, which has a little diagram of it. So it will start when you're starting. I guess our traffic will be going this way, right?
Yep.
And that's our work zone will be over here.
We're gonna pretend we're gonna be working on a telephone pole right there.
So first you need to do is set up your signs. And these signs will be the 3 signs. One will be letting the driver know that there's going to be a work zone coming up. The next one's going to tell the driver what's happening. You're going to channel into another lane, and then you'll have your flagger sign here. Then further down, again, these spacings are identified within the work zone. It's going to be based on the speed of the traffic, the overall speed of the traffic. And then we'll have our flagger zone here. And then we'll start our our cones coming out, our taper. See if we can get the right number here.
Yeah, how many is that supposed to be?
There should be a minimum of 6. Depending on the speed, it's going to vary a little bit, depending on the type of work zone you're going to have. So you'll have 6 cones for your taper. And again, the spacing will be based on the speed. Typically, if you've got a speed of 35 miles an hour, you're going to want them 35 feet apart. And then you'll have your next section. This will be your transition zone. And then this next part here will be your work zone. So from here to here, you'll have the work zone isn't going to be in this area here. This part right here will be your buffer zone. The buffer zone, the purpose of that is basically when somebody's not paying attention and doesn't see. Okay, we'll move that. When somebody's not paying attention while they're driving, they miss your 3 signs. Then they miss your flagger. Then once they hit these cones, this work zone here, this area here, this buffer zone, gives them adequate time to slow down and stop. And the work zone or the buffer zone in itself is set up based on how fast the traffic is going. Again, how quick it's going to be able to, you're going to be able to stop on that.
Yeah.
So we'll have your taper zone, then you've got your buffer zone, then you've got your work zone, and then your cones will be set up here along this work zone here. And their spacing will be set 2 times the speed of the velocity, speed of traffic. So if you got 35, you'll have them 70 feet apart at that point, and that'll be based on how big your work zone is going to be. So you've got your taper zone here, your buffer zone here, your work zone here, and then this is your return to zone here. I think there's a name for that. Termination.
Yeah.
How about that? So you have your termination zone here, and that can go pretty quickly. And then as well as you're setting this up, you're also going to have your signs, your 3 signs over here, again, set at the same distance. And then you'll have your flagger as well that's going to be pointed here. And again, your traffic's going to be set up so it can stop and then work its way around through the work zone. Typically, the flagger will be controlling with a stop slow paddle. Ideally, you're going to have a visual between each other. If you don't, or even if far apart, you may want to have a horn or a whistle or something in case somebody does drive this through that the taper zone and your buffer zone. You want to alarm the workers over here that somebody's coming. You don't want to get run over. What you want to do is the flagger's job is to protect the people in the work zone. So essentially, ideally, you're going to have some sort of direct communication, whether it's visual or a horn or something like that. And again, it's going to depend on your work zone itself. So these are going to be the 5 sections that you're really going to have as far as you have the taper, your sign zones, taper, buffer, work zone, termination zone, and then again, your flagger, work signs. And again, these are going to be all set up based on the velocity of the traffic. And all that information is in here. There's formulas for the taper zone. There's also a table in here that'll give you an idea how far you need to set that up, where the spacing is going to be based on, again, on velocity of the traffic. Typically with these signs, minimum is 18-inch sign cone, 18-inch high cone. You should, for anything less than 45 miles an hour, you need a 28-inch sign with 2 4-inch retroreflective tape sections on them.
So Jeff and I were talking this morning because it was interesting. We have a situation here where we're real close to the river. So this morning we got up and it was foggier than heck out here. And I was thinking, boy, this will be interesting if we still have fog and it hasn't burned off yet. So I asked Jeff, I said, Jeff, what? I mean, it's pretty much common sense, but still, you know, things that you just don't pull this thing out and say, okay, this is what it says. This is what I do. You got to take some common sense into it. And Jeff, what do you do if you got a foggy morning and you can't see?
You're going to want to try to use what the idea is to try to grab the attention of the driver, command that attention. So essentially you could use some flashers, flashing lights, whatever it might be, just to get that attention, to let them know there's a work zone here. there are other situations where you might have a curve and you're working just beyond that curve. Adjust that work zone so the flagger and the signs or everything is visible to the driver coming up, even if they can't see the work zone that they're stopped at. Stop them before that. That would work with a hill as well. Slow them down, stop them before the hill. Again, your job is to protect the workers in that work zone as a flagger.
How about if you're out on a, because a lot of guys have a lot of country roads and they're winding and twisting, and you said something about a hill, but what happens if you have a long curve? How far back do you want to go to catch that?
As far back as necessary. You want to be able to, the drivers to see that person approaching that work zone. They want to be able to give them that information so they slow down. So you'd move the flagger and all your signs beyond that curve to where the line of sight is actually pretty good, and that you can see that. Stop them and slow them down before they get to where they got to slam on the brakes.
So the worst thing you do is do nothing and just do it by the book. The best thing would be.
Yeah, a little common sense goes a long way as well.
Yeah.
This is a guide, a good one, but you can adjust it for the safety of the workers in the work zone.
Yeah, very good. You got anything else?
As far as a flaggers, we do have a flaggers handbook, and this will tell you what to do as a flagger within that work zone itself. So it'll tell you how to stand, how to properly set up yourself, some of the do's and don'ts, how to use the signs. It's a good reference little manual. And the work zone pocket guide and the flagger guides are available from us for no charge. Use them, we have them. We also have an app that you can put on your phone. So you can develop a work plan right there on your phone, export it to the computer or the laptop, and print out a work form right there. You can add the equipment that's in there, the time of day, the date, the weather, and use that as a documented piece for that work zone. Again, that'll help you legally should something happen in that work zone.
And I think everybody's heard of this. There's always an accident, and we just had one here not too long ago. It was a couple years back. A DOT worker got killed down in the town of Owego. He was out there working, and the guy ran the zone and killed him. He was standing right there. So this is serious stuff. I mean, obviously David wanted us to go through this and bring it to light, because it has an important role not only on you, but also your workers too. And our bottom line of the day is that we go home to our families and loved ones. And that's why we're here today, is just to kind of give you a little idea of what's going on. Obviously, there's times that you can't do everything that's here, but again, something's better than nothing. If you just walk out the door with 2 cones and no communication between you and your workers, you're not going to have a safe zone. And just yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was driving around, and one of the utility companies had just a men working sign, and they had a bunch of guys staring down the hole in a few trucks, and they had all the traffic pushed into one lane, and we're relying on the drivers themselves to manage the traffic. And that's not a good situation.
Definitely not. No, you don't want to leave it to the driver's device to make the decisions. You want to direct them, let them know what they do, know what to do. That's, again, part of the sign. That's our communication to the public. The flagger itself is, they're going to be there to help answer questions, guide traffic, stop them when they need to be stopped.
Let's just go through this real quick one more time so everybody got it. We're going to do 3 signs, right? Flagger, and then we're going to do the advance warning.
The taper.
The taper. All right.
The signs are the advanced warning.
Okay, and then the transition. That's the transition.
The taper transition
And
area.
then buffer zone.
Yes.
All right. And for our intents purposes, I think we did 100 or 200 feet, 100 feet.
Yeah, it's going to be.
And then I
again,
think the
based
next
on
zone was somewhere around 200 feet, the work zone. And then
speed.
and then we tapered back. We went a little bit slower taper. We kept it the same as the transition. But that's kind of when we get outside, that's what you guys are going to see, these 2 young men set up for us. And with that, I think Nick's going to make us try not to make us too sick jerk with his nimble hands. So with that, we'll go outside and take a look. So And of course, I forgot the most important thing, your PPE. Don't forget your PPE when you go outside in the work zone. You guys go ahead. So here's our little work zone. We're right out in front of the garage here. And here comes a speeder right through there. We haven't quite set it up yet, so that's not bad. You go, Nick. So one of the things we wanted to point out, that's kind of like what we're talking about. We got a little rise in elevation at the end of the road up there. Obviously, work zone is quite far away from that. But if it was a little bit longer and we had to have a little bit more, those signs that we have up there really should be on the other side of that hill, warning people that there's something going on this side. Worst thing you could have is them coming over the hill and all of a sudden saying, oops, I gotta stop, and slamming on the brakes. So I think we're good for here today. With that, let's take in, just watch them set it up here for a minute. Nick, I don't know if you can catch, you can come any farther. So down at this end, we've got our signs out. We've got a unique situation here. We're on a dead end, and I don't know if anybody knows where the town of Dickinson is. 17, 86, 81, and 88 all intersect right here. And if you look over there, there's brand new bridges. And so we're kind of like the hub of everything. So it's a little road noise out here. And you can see down at the end towards the turnaround down there, there's our signs, our early warning signs. So,
And again, based on the speed limit that the traffic is traveling, you're going to want to set your signs up. As you mentioned with your PPE, you definitely need a minimum of a class 2 vest in the state right of way or any road right of way for your protection. And that essentially has your retroreflective that goes all the way around, up and down and all the way around. If you're working at night, you're going to want class 3, which adds the legs and the pants to the vest. Again, you want to be seen. If you're working as a flagger at night, you're going to want to have that area needs to be illuminated. And again, you just want to be, noticed. You want to be seen. That's the goal here, is not to get run over. And then the 2 flaggers will communicate with each other based on the traffic as it flows through. You don't want to try to keep anybody held up too long if you can help it. Again, people get irritable. And the flaggers are essentially to give information, guide traffic. And again, within our manual, our little handbook, that's going to give you a lot of information on some of the do's and don'ts that are out there. Very informative, a good guide. Just as a basic training, again, the flagger's job is to protect the workers in the work zone. The flagger also needs to be awake. No headphones, no music. Ideally, if you can wear a different color vest from the workers, that's going to set you apart. So again, there's several things, even as the flagger itself, there's going to be a lot of important information. It's one of the most important jobs on the job site itself. So protecting your workers, protecting yourself, be alert, have an escape route if you're a flagger. If somebody comes at you, you want to get out of the way. You want to stand on the side of the road, not in the lane of traffic, until that traffic stops and they acknowledge that they are stopped and you acknowledge they're stopped. Then you may want to step to the center line to just make sure that people are continuing to stop. Again, safety first.
I know down where Alex lives in Long Island, they don't have these issues because everything's flat, right? That's what he tells us.
Everything's flat, but they've got issues, I'm sure.
I'm sure
You're dealing with people.
They got different issues.
So there are some things too. You don't want to, on our list here, you don't want to wait till the trucks show up to set up your work zone. You want to be prepared, have that ready to go before you start working. Everybody informed on what's going on, what's happening. You want to have a plan, decide ahead of time how and where you're going to want to put those displaced traffic. Know how many pieces of equipment you're going to need, how many cones, how many flags, how many signs. And you want those things to be visible too. You don't want the old sign that's been rolled up in the asphalt for a while. You want them to be clean. Signs need to command attention. It's how you get the attention of the drivers. School buses are also critical. You need to coordinate with the school districts if you're going to be working during the school period. You want to make sure that they don't get held up too long. They've got responsibilities as
Well,
well.
like yesterday, I took the time and I went through to each one of the businesses, because we got several different businesses down through here. I kind of give them a heads up of what we're doing here today, so they weren't wondering what the heck are they doing out there. So that's helped us, because they were kind enough to make arrangements for us and change their schedule a little bit today. So that's absolutely right. You should go out, tell the neighbors, the community, whoever you got to talk to. That's the best.
Yeah, and you want to communicate your plan with everybody involved. Everybody should know what the plan is. Be aware of how the cones are set up, where the traffic's going, what to do in case of an emergency, have your contact numbers. Draw it out so everybody knows what the plan is. Again, having that plan as a document is going to protect you legally, provided you've done it properly. And then you want to know if you have the right signage. Again, 3 signs ahead, one telling that there's going to be work coming up, one that says what's going to happen, and then another one telling you there's going to be a flag.
Which brings up a good question. What happens if I don't have that sign?
Which one?
Say I'm missing one of the signs. I got 2 or 3 of them and I don't have one.
You should, well, ultimately you should get one.
Well, how
Get the
about-
signs, but if you don't have it at that job, maybe reach out to some of your neighbors,
There you go.
local jurisdictions, maybe your neighboring town.
Yeah.
Ask the 4 questions.
Oh, so what else you got? Is that it? I think
Yeah.
that's about it. You guys, is there any questions that
There's-
anybody
there's-
has? You have to go back in because we can't hear.
Yeah, we can't hear any questions in here, so we'll have to go back. in.
David, we're moving back
again, as far
inside
as
here for a second. 'Cause
Proper
we can't hear
setup,
you.
proper takedown. You want
Don't
to,
fall in.
you want to work from the center and take them out. The work zones, you want to take them
Here we go. Now we
down
can hear.
properly. You don't want to leave yourself vulnerable. When
When would you use a single flagger?
low volume roads, slow traffic, isolated areas. And if you have a single flagger, you don't want them on one end or the other. You want them directly opposite side of the road from the work zone itself.
So they can control both
So you
directions.
can control both sides. They can be seen. Again, it's got to be a small project, typically a smaller project, low volume roads and slow traffic. Again, people will race through if they don't see it.
More questions?
More questions?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear
We
you.
can hear you.
Hey, we can hear. That's always good. Again, folks, please put your questions in the Q&A, and that way we can get questions back and forth. So how long do you give to set up in the morning?
Well, that's a good question. You don't want to be there 15 minutes or 5 minutes before the guys are starting to work. Like this morning, we staged everything ahead of time, which obviously, I mean, we did it for videoing purposes, but it worked out really well. By having it all staged out, we had it marked. We went actually the day before and marked out what we were going to do, so we knew. And then the guys just really go through and just set it up real quick. So, I mean, obviously, if you can plan it farther in advance, then the farther you have it, the better it is. It makes it faster and easier, less confusion, and a better setup.
Okay.
Worst thing you want to do is get to the job and find out you don't have a sign or you don't have enough cones, and then you're trying to makeshift it to make it work.
Well, it's good to sketch before you get there, right?
That's right.
So should
Plan
you
ahead,
inform?
communicate your plan, know what your equipment's going to be, know what you're going to need prior to getting there. So when you get there, you can have all that equipment there, and you're not running for pieces.
So should you inform the fire companies, the police, the ambulance people?
Yeah, absolutely. You should definitely contact the emergency services, fire, police. Let them know that you're going to be doing a work zone. You're going to be setting something up. There may be traffic congestion. Let them know that there's going to be something that they're going to be encountering along the way.
How often should your flagger be certified or retrained?
I couldn't hear
How
that.
often should your flagger be certified or retrained?
At least annually, I would think. You definitely want to keep that training up. You don't want them to forget any critical information that goes along there. Ideally, again, ideally you want to protect your crew. You want to make sure that everybody's going to be safe, and that a large responsibility for that is your flagging. And you want to rotate your flaggers. You don't want to leave them out there all day. They've got to be alert. So if you can rotate your flaggers and give them breaks.
That's a good point, Jeff, because a lot of times when we do paving, it's an all day thing. You're very hot. You know, you want to make sure they're hydrated. And what that means, you know, having to go to the bathroom. So you need to give them that opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
That's important.
So, you know, in New York State, we don't certify people. That's not the way the rules are set up. But as a minimum, we recommend folks take and every year visit our flagging tutorial website. And I just put it into the chat pod for everybody. I know you're going to move over so you can hear. You're more than welcome to look at that flagging tutorial and make sure your flaggers understand all of that, because they're your first line of protection. Technology.
Yes.
So what about taking the work zone down? Are there any special things you need to do to take the work zone down?
You want to work in reverse is how you set it up. Again, you don't want to leave your workers vulnerable, so you want to keep the paper there. You want to work from, okay, we're going to move around here. I think I can hear from over here now. But
We turned up the speaker so we could hear you better, David, because your voice wasn't projecting very well, but now we're getting feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to start with the signs. You don't want to start with the paper. So you want to start technically probably where the traffic is, the opposite end of where the traffic's coming, and work in reverse as you would have set it up. Again, you want to protect your workers and you want to protect the people that are pulling the signs out. So you'd work in reverse. So the last cones you would pull out would be the cones facing the oncoming traffic at that paper, right near where the flagger would be standing. And if you're planning on keeping your work zone up and you're pulling just the material, yeah, I'm looking at the speaker. If you're planning on working on a work zone and you're going to take break or take a lunch, you definitely want to turn your signs. If there's no work there and you're not doing anything, it's going to give a false impression to the drivers that, oh, it's just another dummy work zone. So you want to turn your signs so they're not visible. Again, you don't want to give the wrong message. You want them to take that information serious.
Is there any talk about messaging boards being used instead of the 3 signs that lead into a work zone?
I didn't quite hear all that.
Messaging boards instead of
messaging boards, they're useful. I'm not really sure how accepted they are. They do help as far as advanced warning. They will give a heads up. I've seen them a lot of times on interstates where they'll say 10 miles work zone coming up or something, but on local roads as well, they can be used. They can be helpful. Again, you're conveying information to the public. That would be in addition to your 3 signs. I would prefer that.
Yeah, you would do it in addition. You would not do it by itself. Those 3 signs are critical. So, yep, I agree. So what's the most important rule while flagging in a work zone?
Flagging in a work zone?
pay attention.
Yeah, pay attention. Yeah, stay alert, pay attention. Don't dawdle, no, don't drift off, don't use your phone. Again, your job is to protect the workers. You need to stay alert. You need to protect the, again, you got to protect yourself. Give yourself a way out of it in case traffic isn't coming. But you also want to be there to alert the workers to prevent them from getting injured in any capacity. Everybody wants to go home, as Joel had said earlier.
So why are stop slow paddles the primary hand signaling device rather than a flag?
Well, people can clearly understand what a stop slow paddle means. They understand what slow means. They understand what stop means. A flagger can be misleading. Flaggers are typically only used in an emergency situation, ideally. And the use of the flags, a lot of times flaggers use them as an Indianapolis 500 flag or so. That is the improper way of doing it. So stop flow paddles are the preferred way, and it conveys the message a lot stronger to the user.
Well, I know a stop sign is critical. In fact, I looked it up this morning. I did finally confirm the stop sign is the universal sign. It's the same in every country, including the North Korea. So people know what a stop sign is. Do you have any what do you do if you have to leave your post as a flagger, if you need a break?
Well, you should definitely have someone replace you. You don't want to leave that space vacant. Somebody needs to replace you. Again, somebody needs to be trained and understand what they're doing. Again, it's one of the most important ones, but if you are leaving your post as a flagger, make sure somebody replaces you. Have that all set up, planned, and ready to go. You definitely don't want to leave that post empty.
So this is an interesting one. What do you tell the drivers they should do when they approach and go through a work zone?
Slow down, pay attention. People's lives depend on it. It's critical. If they're stopping and asking why they're working, you want to be informed. Again, you want to have that communication to plan what you're doing so the flagger can convey that information to the driver and help guide them, help them understand what's going on.
Where should the flagger be standing relative to the lane?
Really? Oh, all right. Well, let's take a walk back to the whiteboard in here. That light go on by itself?
Ooh, fancy.
The flagger should be stationed right at the beginning of the taper. Again, with adequate spacing between the signs. Again, you want to be off of the road on the shoulder, away from any potential missed driver without paying attention. So ideally, on the right side of the shoulder here, just before the taper. You don't want to be in the middle. You don't want to be outside. You can't trust the driver that's coming at you, whether they see you or not. So on the right side of the shoulder.
And the other one would be.
And again, on the right side of the opposite side.
Where would they be if they're a single flagger?
They would be on the opposite side, directly across from the work zone. Again, you would only use that in low volume traffic. You would have your work zone over here, but you would have your single flagger here, and typically it would be a short space where the flagger would actually be.
He probably needs to move back and forth, doesn't he, to really see the traffic?
Yeah, it would depend. If the work zone gets too big, then you're going to want to use two flaggers. You don't want to use one flagger for a long work zone. That's not recommended. Again, you're putting danger into everybody's hands at that point.
Do you have any examples of some traffic control devices either that you could show or you could talk about?
We could go back outside or upstairs. We go upstairs?
Yeah, we go upstairs.
Sure.
And by the way, Joel, while you're walking upstairs, got a comment here. You've got the cleanest shop they've ever seen.
Oh.
And by the way, for those who are wondering, he did not clean it up just for us. We visited earlier and it was that clean even then. So.
Whoops. That would be us. Feedback.
Feedback. Good news is we don't hear the feedback from our end.
All right. I'm assuming we can still be heard.
Yeah, so here's a good one.
Yes, you can still be
It's
heard.
kind of a unique to us, believe it or not. And what's nice about it is we set this up ahead of time, and it's just an information thing. We set it up ahead of time, and then you can put what day of the week you want on it. So we've got a bunch of these. And it just gives people a heads up when we're doing something.
You put that up a couple of days ahead of time, I assume?
What else? Detour. Everybody should have one of these. Detour. Again, we were, instead of getting a sign specific, we put it on Velcro so we can flip the little arrow around so you don't have to have 10 or 15 different arrows and go, geez, if we're one shorter, we're off there.
If you do set up the detour, you don't want just one sign. You want to, you want to set up a route. Make sure that route is labeled so the traffic can follow that sign as well. Men working sign. And that's going to be one of your introduction signs, your first sign in the layer of 3.
How about the guy shoveling?
I don't believe that's accepted anymore.
There you go. Thank you. So that's a new
If
thing.
that's what you've got, use it.
As far as signs too, if you're using signs or your signs that you have there, if they're faded, if they're worn out, you don't want to use them. And again, these need to command attention. You need people to be able to see them. Obviously, this is a stop sign that is outlived its day. You probably can't see this at night. Again, the contrast between the red and the white is probably kind of blurred out and it'd be difficult to see, but the same goes for work zone signs. You definitely want them to be clean, want them to be visible. That's a stop slow paddle there. You've got the stop on one side and a slow on the other. So that typically sits on a post that you can just kind of spin around, so you don't necessarily have to hold it all day. You'd have alley-oop arms or something if you did that. But again, your signs need to be clear, need to be clean. Same with your vests. You want them in good shape. You don't want them. Pete, show the flagger guy. I left mine downstairs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we've got the work zone. Here's our flagger guide. It's flagging handbook, kind of goes through flagger safety. Okay, it's got a table of contents, basic functions of a flagger, equipment, appearance, which is critical. If you look good, people are going to understand and pay more attention to you. Advanced warning signs, it again discusses what signs are critical, where they ought to be, the positioning of them, different types of hand signals that a flagger needs to use. And then operations, it'll go into single flagger, 2 flagger, the use of a pilot car, night flagging, one directional track flagging, emergency flagging. It goes into the do's and don'ts, obviously the acknowledgements, but they kind of know the appearance. You want to assure motorists respect your appearance. If you look like a slob, they might not give you the time of day. The equipment, again, the sign sizes, minimum of an 18 by 18 stop sign. If a higher speed traffic, you might want to go to 24/24. Again, you hard hat if it's required in your agency, vest, an air horn, as I mentioned earlier. Again, you want to notify the workers if somebody goes through. And then again, your nighttime flagging and your different flags that you may be able to use. So it kind of goes into detail on a lot of the different things. Again, shows us our work zone, our different signs, road work ahead, 1-lane road, then the flagger. So it tells you where the flagger needs to stand, gives you minimum distances, buffer zone, taper. And again, these signs, distance behind the signs are going to be based on whether it's an urban or a rural area and the velocities of the traffic. So the sign placement, sign removal, kind of talks about all of this. Positioning, again, alone on the highly visible location, you want to be seen. And then again, you never want to stand in the oncoming path of the vehicle. And you want to be able to have yourself a route to get out of there. This is what we were talking about when we were talking about hills and curves. You don't want to be behind the hill, you want to be in front of it. Same with on curves. If you're going around a sharp turn, you don't want to be in that curve. So you want to be able to be out in front. You want to be visible before anybody even gets to where that work zone is going to be.
Can you guys hear me up
Different types
there?
of hand signals as well. Was that a question?
I just wonder if you guys can hear me from up there.
We can't hear you. I'll keep talking. But again, the hand signals with the stop slow. Again, when you're stopping, you want to put your sign up and your hand up. And then when you turn slow, you want to sweep across with your arm to let them know that they can go by. So
Repeat the question, David. We can hear you now.
So I had 2 last questions for you. One was, what do you do if a vehicle breaks down in the construction zone itself?
What's the vehicle breakdown?
you mean,
Right in the middle
Oh,
of
it
the
breaks
work zone.
down. Oh. Yeah, I think you really have to address that ASAP. I mean, that would really kind of screw up your day for a while, because obviously you'd have to get out of the way so that traffic can continue to move.
Okay. And then one last question. What do you recommend as a minimum for record keeping?
A minimum for record keeping? I would think that you would want to you should be doing a daily log anyhow.
You'd also want to hang on to your work zone plan. Again, if you're drawing that up and keeping it as a record, you want to keep that and file it, and you want to date, you want to put the equipment on there. The number of pieces of equipment that you're going to have there, to maybe even the names of the workers there at the time. But again, you want to have some sort of record of that work zone before and after you've done that work zone.
And I have a good question that I thought of as we're talking here. Oftentimes, we have different agencies come in and do crack sealing for us, and that's a mobile thing. And they're moving oftentimes great distances. It's not like it's like what we can close down a single lane to do that, because they're going back and forth over a whole road. Is it okay to follow them with flashing lights?
It is actually. Again, in our flagger's handbook, it has a layout of how the flag should be. Again, they've got your advance warning to let you know that there are, and then it says 5 miles is a maximum. But again, you should have something on the trucks. If it's a mobile operation, the minimum height off of the ground is going to be 1 foot. So again, you want a 1-lane road, you want these buffer trucks to try to work with you to protect the workers. But you can do a mobile operation, but you still should have some sort of advance warning for the traffic to know what's going on.
Okay, well, we're at the end of our time. Joel and Jeff, nice job. Thanks very much. Nick behind the camera, good work. And your 2 guys there, give them a nice round too. Thanks, guys. It's time for our break. We're going to be starting back up again at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock. Again, thanks again, and stay cool. Take care.
Thanks.
We'll be starting back up in about 2 minutes. Good morning, and welcome back to our, well, it's not really our last hour, it's our last conference hour, but anybody who's interested, please stay on for the visit with your CHIPS representative. We did have someone actually put a question in the Q&A specifically about that Q&A with their CHIPS representative. They were wondering about the monies they were getting this year. So I would definitely be doing that. In just a minute, we'll be starting our conversation with the acting administrator for FHWA. And then after that, we'll be hearing from Emmett Mcdevitt, who y'all have known for many, many years. And Emmett is promised us a good joke. So we'll see what we get here from him today. And I know that online we have the division administrator, so Emmett will have to be a little bit careful there. So just making sure the administrator has logged in, and then we'll get started. Someone put in the Q&A, the man of many jokes. Yep. And if you're wondering, that's actually Cayuga Lake behind me, not Highway School. I don't think we get a whole Highway School on the lake. It's pretty good what all this technology does. We've learned a lot, but we will be really glad next year when we see everybody here in Ithaca face to face and enjoying things. And again, if you have any questions or anything, please let us know. And it looks like Administrator Pollock is in, so just let me do a quick introduction. We're going to have a conversation with her. Stephanie Pollock was named the Acting Federal Highway Administrator on February 24th of this year. In this role, she provides executive leadership and strategic direction within FHWA to advance the goals and priorities of the department. She brings over 30 years of executive experience to the agency, and most recently served as Secretary and CEO of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. Stephanie earned a JD from Harvard Law School, a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering, and a Bachelor's of Science in Public Policy from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Good morning and welcome, Administrator Pollock.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, David. I'm delighted to be joining you all today, and sorry that it's still virtual, but hopefully that will change soon.
We're all working on that. We actually took the school this year on the road. We did 4 field visits, which is actually sort of fun. More of a good roads week, back to the old get the farmer out of the mud idea, go out to people where they are. So that actually worked out well.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. And I love the idea of Good Roads Week and of what you're doing in New York, because one of the reasons that I took the job at Federal Highway is that we're in a moment where I think we're redefining what a good road really is, or a good road project really is. Obviously, a project that helps put our roads and bridges and other transportation assets into better condition is always going to be, you know, a good investment. But we're really thinking about, for example, you know, how do you turn a road into a complete street? What does it mean for a road to be safe and good for everyone who uses that road, whether you're walking or biking or driving in a car or getting on or off a bus or in a wheelchair? I did a lot of work on complete streets when I headed the Department of Transportation in Massachusetts, and we've already got a great working group on the topic going at Federal Highway. I think that our collective definition of what a good road is also evolving because of climate change, because our roads need to be resilient to climate change and the things that imperil roads, whether it's flooding or heat. And they need to support our efforts to encourage people to walk, bike, and use transit. And, you know, Federal Highway is obviously our country's highway agency, but the name is a little bit of a misnomer because the interstate system is only a very tiny proportion of the national highway system and the so-called federal aid eligible system, which actually, for example, includes every urban arterial in the United States of America is now part of our national highway system. So we have a lot of roads that are not highways that we need to think about what would make them from the facility they are today into a good road. And then the last comment I'll make, and then I'm happy to have the discussion and the questions, is I'm particularly delighted to be participating today because the Federal Highway's relationship to local agencies has been important for a long time. Next year will actually represent the 40th anniversary of our creation of the Center for Local Support that this is part of, and we have these in every state. So we've been at it a long time, but you know, now the Department of Transportation is an agency whose head was a mayor. And I have a lot of colleagues here at the U.S. Department of Transportation who come from local government and whose experiences in local government, whereas I think historically maybe more of them came from the state DOT side. And so I can assure you that our focus on working directly and effectively with our partners at cities and towns, not just with our partners at state departments of transportation, is going to be a big focus of the Department of Transportation and Federal Highway under Secretary Buttigieg's leadership.
Well, good. And by the way, you're in a great state, New York, because we call our local roads outside of urban areas highways because the leaders are superintendents of highways. So we're used to that term.
There we go.
So the first question I've got for you is, how can FHWA help facilitate partnerships between the locals, the state, and federal agencies?
So that's a great question. So one of the things that excites me about Federal Highways is that we actually have a network that's outside of our headquarters here in Washington, D.C., that's really designed to work directly with our local and state partners. You know, one of the jokes that Secretary Buttigieg sometimes makes is that only in Washington, D.C., is the phrase local and state means sort of one unified thing. He is very aware that there is a difference between local and state. So at Federal Highway, we actually have 2 offices in every state in the union. We have our, what we call our division offices. So in New York, our division office is in Albany, and our division administrator is Rick Marquis. And I know that Rick and his staff work very closely with NYSLTAP, but also with other partners in the state. And I know they're going to be making a presentation to you about how our federal aid highway program works and how you can tap into that resource. So that's one federal highway resource for cities and towns in New York is the division office, and that resource exists in every state. But the second resource, David, is what you're part of, which is our state local technical assistance program, or LTAP, which has existed, as I said, since 1982 and supports local and rural road agencies across the country by providing training, technical assistance, and technology transfer services to help them manage and maintain their roadway systems. So we also have 51 of these LTAP centers, one in each state and one for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, which means that from the perspective of municipalities, you both have the resources of the division office that administers the federal aid program, and you have the resources of the LTAP program, David, that you guys run. And also I would note that even communities in New York can access LTAP resources, not just from the great work that you're doing in New York, really, but from across our programs, because both the Federal Highways website for our Center for Local and Aid and Support, and the website for the National Local Technical Assistance Program Association include just tons of great resources, webinars, videos, and other materials. So we already have a great set of resources for municipalities. And as I said, under the leadership of our former mayor, now Secretary Pete, I know that that's only going to grow.
So there's a lot of discussion about an infrastructure bill in Washington. How will that new infrastructure bill affect those local agencies here in New York who manage 85% of the center line mileage?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as I think most of the folks listening in know, there are really two kinds of public roads in the United States. There are the public roads that are eligible for federal aid and can tap into our existing federal aid programs. And then there are the ones that are not, which is, I think, what you're talking about, David, when you talk about the 85% of the centerline mileage, although again, it can be, you can have a locally owned or managed road that is in fact federal aid eligible if it is part of the national highway system. And I would also note that there are two federal programs that actually are applicable across the country, even if you don't have a federal aid road. So the bridge program applies to every bridge on the National Bridge Inventory, whether or not it's on the National Highway System, even if it's what we call an off-system bridge, absolutely is federal aid eligible. And the second thing is our premier safety program, the HSIP program, can be tapped if you have a road that is not a National Highway System road that has an identified safety problem, you can use it. So most federal aid is limited to a specific network of roads called the National Highway System, but for bridges and for safety, that's not true. But one of the things that excites me about the infrastructure package that you referred to, David, is that the administration has actually made increasing the amount of resources a priority and creating some new resources that would directly benefit municipalities. So there are two things really going on in Washington right now around infrastructure. One is there's the so-called reauthorization of our regular surface transportation program. So the last federal surface transportation law was called the FAST Act. It expires on September 30th. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee was actually at work for 17 hours, finishing up at 5 o'clock this morning on the House version, and they voted that out. So we now have both a House and a Senate committee that have voted out their versions of what the reauthorization should look like. And we're obviously hopeful that before the current reauthorization expires September 30th, we'll have a new reauthorization. And then in addition to and on top of that, there is President Biden's American Jobs Plan, which would be additional funding for infrastructure on top of our normal surface transportation program. And there's really no way to overstate the importance of the American Jobs Plan, which would provide a transformative investment of $620 billion for the roads and bridges part and transit and rail part. So the transportation part of the American Jobs Plan, you've heard of it as a $1.9 trillion program, but $620 billion of that is for transportation infrastructure. And again, that would be on top of reauthorization. And I just wanted to highlight how that how passage of that plan by Congress could really make a difference to municipalities in New York and throughout the country in two ways. So one is that the president has proposed a total increase of about $115 billion just for bridges, highways, roads, and main streets that are in the most critical need of repair. That should be enough money to fix, again, on top of our regular program, 20,000 miles of roads and 10,000 bridges. And anything that increases the size of the total federal aid program, I think benefits municipalities because you all compete for a pot of money that the metropolitan planning organizations have to program. And if they have more to program and they have the resources to do thousands more miles of roadways and thousands more bridges, that's going to help in that traditional federal aid program. But in addition, the President's American Jobs Plan proposes pots of money that would actually flow directly to local public agencies, either through formulas or through competitive programs. And so let me just mention three that I'm sure are of real interest to cities and towns in New York. So one of them is a Safe Streets for All program that would invest an additional $20 billion to improve road safety for all users, including which is a combination of increases to the existing HSIP program that I mentioned, but also a new Safe Streets for All program that would directly fund local Vision Zero plans and local improvements to reduce crashes and fatalities, especially for cyclists and pedestrians. There's also an additional program called Fix It Right that is part of the American Jobs Plan that would be which would help both state and locally owned roads and make sure that when we invest in roadway reconstruction, again, we focus on all users and we focus on safety for all users, resiliency, equity, not just sort of starting with the asset that happens to be broken, that's fix it first, but really expanding that to a fix it right mentality. And then the third program is a $20 billion new program that would fund projects that reconnect neighborhoods that have been cut off by historic investments and ensure that new projects increase opportunity, advance racial equity and environmental justice, and promote affordable access. And I know that there are a number of communities in New York State that are looking at either that have done reconnection projects like Rochester or that are looking at some projects. And so again, that's a new pot of money that would be directly available to local public agencies rather than flowing through the federal aid program.
Okay, cool. Glad we'll see how those come out. How will local agencies here in New York be involved with the new workforce development focus area?
So that's another great question, David. So we all know that the demand for highway construction, maintenance, and operations workers has been growing for a long time. And then we also know that it's not an industry that has necessarily been as diverse and welcoming of women and people of color as we would like. And we know that there are emerging technologies that are requiring our construction workforce to have new skills. And so Federal Highway wants to play a critical role in expanding and diversifying our highway workforce, who's in it, and making sure that we have a big enough workforce so that as these additional resources come online through reauthorization or the American Jobs Plan, we have the people to build the roads and then it benefits locally. So there are two things Federal Highway is up to. One is we have a program called Highway Construction Workforce Partnership. Those are grants that we make to states, but many of them flow through to individual projects. We have $4 million for funding for those grants. New York has applied, so I can't talk about who's going to get those grants, but that's one great program with a track record. The other thing that I think is that may be important to some of the folks who are participating in this is a concept called local hire. And the idea of local hire is traditionally it's been very difficult when you use federal dollars to impose a requirement on those federal dollars that they hire folks from the community where the project is going on. And that may be That may be community residents, it could be vets, it could be people of color, it could be women. Local hire programs vary because the idea is the community that is hosting the infrastructure investment wants to define how they want the jobs to be focused. And you work with the contractor, and it has to be included when you advertise the project, or else you can't do it. And Federal Highway used to have a local hire program. It was terminated under the prior administration. We've just announced Secretary Buttigieg, together actually with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, just announced that we're reopening that program. We put a federal register in. So if you have a project coming to your community that's going to be built with federal dollars and you're interested in having a local hire component to that program and it hasn't been advertised yet, for the next 4 years, we've opened up the possibility of applying and getting permission to include a local hire component in that program. And we're really looking forward to seeing the sort of creativity. And what that means is that every federal dollar invested in your community is really doing double duty. It's building that infrastructure, and it's also employing your residents. So, you know, what could be better than that?
Cool. Nice to hear. So thanks for joining us. We're going to be looking forward to working with you at FHWA, the Division Administrator, Rick Marquis, who I know is on here today, and Commissioner Dominguez with the New York State Department of Transportation as we move forward. And we're looking forward to finding ways to get people working in everything from New York City to, you know, small rural communities like we were in this week. Everybody needs help. We all want good roads to get from point A to point B and stay safe. So thanks again for joining us.
And thank you everybody who's on there, for the work that you do every day to make sure we have good roads and that they're safe roads, and that our infrastructure really produces that sort of double return on investment, improving our infrastructure and providing great jobs. And Federal Highway looks forward, through Rick in the division office, but also through my office in Washington, of really partnering with our partners in every city and town in New York and throughout the country. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. You have a great day.
You too. All of you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So now we're going to switch gears to safety. So that's actually good news. Our person we're going to be hearing from is Emmett Mcdevitt, who is getting ready to retire. He's the safety engineer for the New York State Division Office. He sent me a bio, and I had to edit it. I can't read all of it, Emmett. I apologize. It's not just time. But I can mention some highlights. He was born in Hawaii, raised in a ranch in New Mexico. Something about acquiring a mail truck and driving it into a pond, and a food fight. I'm not sure I really want to repeat that one. I actually knew Emmett when he tried this. He auditioned for the Flying Over Windows. The only problem is he didn't have a trapeze, a net, or an audience. He dove from, what was that, the third floor of your house, Emmett?
Yeah, it was from about 30 feet, I fell.
And you broke your femur, your ribs, your vertebrae, and your scapula.
Yes.
You're supposed to land in water, Emmett. You're supposed to land in water. Yeah, I know you're a professional fighter. You like to take on anything that's involving with safety. I don't have time to tell all the things you've done, but I do know you're good at getting matching socks, and will rent shoes if you have to. I'm not sure about this thing with rearranging people's keyboards, but as you head in retirement, you know, you're going to make people joyous. Some joy when they come, some joy when they leave, but we'll make it have fun here. So we're going to start with your session. I really want to talk a little bit about, you were going to talk about the new safe systems approach from FHWA, and really people are concerned about speeding, rural and urban issues that come in. You know, you saw the session on the work zone this morning, and we want people to be able to go home every single day. So take it away, and then we'll finish up the time, give you a little bit of chance to tell your famous joke.
Thanks, Dave. Okay. So a guy walks into a movie theater, right? And he sees what looks to be like a goat sitting there. And he says, "Are you a goat?" And the goat says, "Yes." He goes, "What do you do in the movie theater?" And the goat says, "I just love the book." So anyway, I'm going to be talking about the safe systems approach here. And safe systems approach, can you see the screen, guys?
Yeah, it looks good, and you sound good. So
okay, great. Safe system approach is really the foundation of the getting to zero deaths on our roadways. And initially, you know, I thought, you know, what a bunch of hogwash. About 10 years ago, I said, this is ridiculous. Usually when you have goals, they have to be achievable and they have to be attainable, right? They have to be reasonable. And I didn't believe that getting to zero, that whole getting to zero was that. I've since changed my mind, not only seeing what other countries are doing, but also seeing the progress we've made in this state with things like the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. And one of the other things is you might be asking, well, what does this have to do with me? I mean, I can't even get my roads paved, you know, and maintained. And I guess my point is to the locals out there is that we can't get it done without you. This is absolutely going to take your effort, because if we look at New York State and 70% of the fatalities happen off the state system, we can't get to zero without your help. We all know the senseless tragedy that happened in Schoharie County when 20 people died in that limo crash. And probably a lot in the audience have some sort of association with this crash. And they were all young, left a lot of victims behind. You know, the parents without kids, kids without parents, and so forth. But if we look back and we look at this based on the safe systems approach, we can look back and see the errors happened way before this crash happened, including the manufacture of the limo itself, dating all the way back to the construction of the limo, and then the maintenance of the limo and other things. So just keep this horrific crash in mind as we go through these slides, and see how in the future we may not be presenting these kind of slides that show the victims of these senseless tragedies. So the safe system approach really, let's see here, I can't get to my slide deck. Okay, here we go. The safe system approach takes a holistic approach to addressing safety. We know that our fatalities have plateaued in the past decade. Interestingly enough, when I started first making presentations for Cornell Local Roads, this number was around low 40,000s to mid 40,000. So we've dropped these fatality rates in the past 20, 25 years by about 25%. But on the other hand, we've kind of plateaued at the 30,000 range, and it doesn't seem to be getting better, especially when you look at the 2020 results. In COVID, for those that don't know, we had a lot less travel. Obviously, everyone was staying home, but we had a lot more fatalities. So our fatality rate for 2020 is going to look abysmal. It's really going to look poor, and believe it or not, probably every state in the country will be in some sort of performance deficit with their safety performance targets. We look at pedestrian deaths. They've increased almost 50% over the last decade, but guess where they haven't increased? They haven't increased in New York State. In fact, they continue to go down. And why? It's because we've taken this, even though we haven't called it this, we've taken this safe system approach and applied it to pedestrian safety. We've engaged the law enforcement community. We've engaged the Department of Health for public information and education. We've actually trained police officers, because how can you dare enforce something that you don't understand? Developed an entire training program for law enforcement to enforce pedestrian laws. We spent $110 million on infrastructure improvements for basic and enhanced pedestrian crossings, many of which went to the locals, but we used data for those 20 focus communities, or those that had most potential of reducing the crashes. $110 million over 5 years. And the results have been outstanding, especially considering that New York State has 10 times the number of pedestrian trips generated as any other state. So while we have a lot more pedestrians, we're seeing our numbers go down. In fact, we're seeing overall numbers go down in general. New York State and New York City had some of the lowest fatalities and serious injuries on record over the past few years. So we can imagine a time when not one single person has to die on our nation's roadways. We don't see any ghost bikes on the roadside, no memorials, no roadside crosses. but it's going to take the efforts of everybody, including planners and designers and you know, maintenance workers and so forth. We heard some of that in the past couple of days about, you know, whether it was crack sealing or just this morning with Jeff and Joel and Nick, I think it was, you know, talking about work zone safety. On Tuesday, when they were talking about crack filling, the first thing they said was make sure it's safe for the employees, make sure it's safe for the motorists. So that's exactly where we need to start with these conversations, and where we need to have the locals engaged in this. So the new direction is that the SAFE system approach aims to eliminate fatal and serious injuries for all road users by accommodating human mistakes. We can remember a time when we used to say, well, the hell with them, right? They were drunk, so they deserved to die. Or they didn't cross at the crosswalk. That's why it was there, and they got hit by a car. So yeah, they deserve to get injured. But the other thing is we need to keep impacts on the human body at tolerable levels, and I'll get into that about kinetic energy and how we can do that with managing speed. Some of the examples of accommodating human mistakes is, say, our rumble strip program. You know, we didn't have one rumble strip until the late 90s, I think it was. Pete Gustafson, who was the traffic engineer for the thruway, put rumble strips on the entire thruway system in a period of about 2 years. So you think about the rumble strips and how it may have affected you in a positive way, you know, whether you're impaired by drugs or alcohol, maybe you're drowsy, or maybe it's even a weather event such as snow, that those rumble strips help keep you on the road. So it's kind of a redundancy. If your human skills are lacking, then the rumble strips take over. And that's the whole concept of safe systems is redundancy in our system. If you're not convinced already, other countries have employed this safe system approach. And it's been around for about 30 years. You can see where some of these countries have experienced between a 50 and 70% reduction in fatalities over 10 years. Now, at the same time, the United States, because we haven't really fully adopted this safe system approach or Vision Zero, we've plateaued, and our average reduction is about 11% per year. So I think we have, we can learn from other countries, and while I don't know that we will ever get to zero in my lifetime, I think that it's very conceivable that we get close to zero, and anything that we get is going to be something greater than we have, right? So these countries that you see here, they've not only had the greatest reduction in fatality rates, but the fastest rate of change of the fatalities by employing this safe system approach. So we have this in several communities throughout the country. I think 50 communities have adopted this. National organizations like ITE and AASHTO have embraced this concept of towards zero deaths. We haven't in New York as a policy in New York State, but New York City has employed the Vision Zero, what they're employing down in New York City. And what it does is, again, it holistically looks at safety. So no matter who it is, whether it's the parking attendants, to the law enforcement, to the designers, to anybody, and the users, anybody that is associated with driving, transit operators, pedestrians, bicyclists, they embrace this towards zero deaths, and it's funded. It's very well funded. I don't know exactly where they get their funding, but it's been very well funded through the last few years. So the 6 principles are that death and serious injury is unacceptable. While no crash is desirable, the safe system approach prioritizes crashes based on serious injuries and fatalities. The goal is to modify how users of our system, whether it be pedestrians or motorists, the vehicle technology, the infrastructure, even the emergency response and enforcement can reduce the likelihood of a fatality, and if a crash does occur, to reduce the severity of it. All of us have accountability in this, whether it's the vehicle manufacturers, the designers, the roadway maintainers, the owners. I think all of us in this context have a responsibility and accountability to this safe systems approach. The other principle is that humans make mistakes. As I mentioned, a pedestrian isn't going to go 350 or 400 feet to a very safe crossing. They're going to cross at mid-block. And one of the things that the safe systems approach does is recognize that they will make mistakes. They are going to text and drive. They are going to drink and drive. But the redundancy in the system accommodates those mistakes. Some examples of accommodating human mistakes is adding either a median or a median barrier to prevent crossover type crashes. Should somebody blow a tire or suffer a medical event, that doesn't give them or the people in the other lane of traffic a death sentence. This is what we're talking about, kinetic energy. And what we need to do is not only manage kinetic energy, but manage the primary function of kinetic energy, or the function of kinetic energy, which is speed. And if we can get those speeds down, then we can, either as a pedestrian or a motorist, then we're going to reduce the G forces on the body, which always is what causes serious injuries and fatalities. So one of the things that we need to do is manage the speed, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So again, the responsibility is shared. One of the principles is that everyone shares the responsibility of getting to zero and the safe system approach, both through the planners, designers, builders, operators, once again, the maintenance workers. Joel, Jeff, and Nick this morning talked about work zone safety and how to not only protect the flaggers and the workers in the road, but protecting the motorists that are traversing through our work zone. The responsibility is also on the vehicle manufacturers to employ the latest technology to prevent crashes. Law enforcement personnel to enforce those laws and issue tickets for bad behavior. And then, of course, the EMS folks, they provide a really important role in survivability and limiting that serious injury. But of course, the last thing is the system user. All of the users are responsible for their own safety. And so it's a shared responsibility and accountability. Safety is proactive. We used to chase fatalities around a geographic area. And what we realized quickly was that fatalities are really randomly distributed. Whereas if we look at latent risks, if we look at risk factors, is what we call them, it may be that we're treating something with a countermeasure that has never had an accident ever. But because of the risk factors associated with that location or that particular area, we want to treat them to prevent a future crash. And by example, when we're looking at road departure crashes here in New York, we looked at the risks associated with different roadside crashes and fatalities. And what we found was that certain geometry curves that had certain shoulder width, that had certain volumes and certain speeds were much more likely to have a fatality or serious injury. So then they mapped out on the network where those curves occurred throughout the state, and now they'll go back and dedicate some money for those countermeasures. In this case of roadway departure, the locals are going to play an extremely important role, because likely most of these roadway departure crashes are going to happen on your system. And then I think this is probably the most important principle, is that redundancy is critical. Again, thinking about that limo crash, had there been redundancy in the system, had the technology been able to supply a redundant set of brakes, or had the intersection or the roadside been equipped with different absorbing material or cushions or whatever, it would have limited the impacts on the occupants and may have prevented the crash altogether. So an example of redundancy, once again, is kind of our rumble strip program. And that is, should you be tired? Should you be impaired? Should it be a weather event? You can fail in your responsibilities as a driver, but the roadside takes over, or maybe even some sort of technology in the vehicle takes over. The 5 safe system elements are safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care, which is obviously the EMS function. So we all have a responsibility, whether we're walking, biking, driving, we're transit users, or maybe even disabled in some way, either physically or mentally. We all have a responsibility as users of our system. And part of that responsibility is not to be distracted or impaired, but we know that's going to happen. And that's where the redundancy takes over. We need to follow the rules of the road. And those rules are usually based on the design elements of it. We have to act within the limits of the roadway. If our roadway is designed for 30 miles an hour and we're going 60, well, we need to have a responsibility as the road users to understand the limitations of that roadway, whether it's geometrics, whether it's roadside design, whether it's pedestrian crossings or whatever, and abide by those rules of the road. So again, a shared responsibility. And then we need to look at safe vehicles. You know, Dave mentioned about me growing up in New Mexico, and this is kind of a side point, but when I grew up in New Mexico, we actually had drive-through liquor stores. So you could literally drive up like you would at a bank and grab a case of beer and a fifth of Jack Daniels, and they'd hand it right through the window, right? We didn't have seat belts, we had lap belts, and that was really for the more affluent and the newer cars. And I can't recall having a child passenger seat. We never had one, although we were pretty poor. 6 of us bouncing around like a bouncy bounce in a 65 country station wagon, you know, Ford Squire, something like that. But anyway, so the culture has really changed, not only with the technology within the passenger vehicle, like seat belts and lap belt or 3 harness belts, but also the crash absorbing crumple zones and the materials that they're using to absorb that energy and reduce that kinetic energy on the passenger. We also have some active safety. Almost all new cars now are going to be having this autonomous emergency braking, this adaptive cruise control and lane departure warning and so forth. My Tundra, actually getting back to the passive safety, my Tundra, 2013, I was really surprised, didn't have any idea, but actually has airbags that are on the ceiling of the vehicle, has airbags in the A-pillar, has the airbag in the side and in the steering wheel. So again, if you think about me getting in a crash in my Tundra, I'm going to be protected almost all the way around by a bunch of bubbles. And that's what we're talking about in terms of the safe vehicles. They're going to be a very primary player in this safe systems approach. Cars are also being designed for urban areas to accommodate pedestrian crashes in the way the vehicle is designed to limit the amount of brain trauma to pedestrians that get hit based on the geometry of the hood of the vehicle, the vehicle size and design, the materials that are being used, the carbon fibers to make them lighter. And then, of course, I think the greatest promise comes with the new technology, the automated vehicles and the vehicle-to-vehicle technology and the vehicle-to-infrastructure, where the vehicles are talking to each other constantly around them, avoiding those conflicts, avoiding head-on collisions, avoiding rear-end collisions, talking to each other without any input by the operator. And then, of course, the vehicle-to-infrastructure, where the vehicle is talking with the infrastructure. They're saying, hey, listen, you need to slow down. You're never going to make this yellow light. Or in a more serious note, the left-hand turns at an intersection are overrepresented. So it might tell a driver, hey, listen, the pedestrians are crossing. I know you're looking for a gap in traffic to speed and get through this intersection, but there's pedestrians there. So it may give them a warning. It's talking with that infrastructure and giving them signs and warnings about what the infrastructure is doing. I pulled this just as kind of a comparison, but humans versus computers. And again, how I'm more convinced that maybe we will get to zero in my lifetime. If we look at the distance requirement to stop of the human mind, we usually use 2.5 seconds in our designs for perception and reaction. That 2.5 seconds is reduced considerably with a microchip, as you can see. Now, the braking distance, the deceleration is always going to remain the same because that's just based on the braking of the vehicle. But you can see where the distance is significantly reduced with a computer chip over a human. And again, just these little things add to bigger things in terms of reducing fatalities and serious injuries. Again, just a random thought here. I rented a vehicle when I went out to watch my daughter play lacrosse in college. And of course, I was speeding down the road to get there. I was kind of late. I was going over the speed limit and listening to the stereo and stuff. I'd just come in from the airport. And so I get there and we watched the lacrosse tournament. And on my way back, there was 2 keys on the key ring, by the way. And on the way back, the car wouldn't go over the speed limit. It wouldn't go over 65 miles an hour. The stereo wouldn't turn up because she was trying to get the stereo to turn up. Well, afterwards, I turned the car in and realized that I had 2 keys on the key ring. One allowed me to go as fast as I wanted and blare the stereo. The other one you give to your kid who's maybe a new or inexperienced driver. And the key itself governs the speed. It governs the volume control on the vehicle, and it won't let the stereo work. And this is how how smart they are. They know that kids are really into their music, and it won't even let the stereo work without the seatbelt being fastened. So these are just really simple technologies that can make a huge difference in fatalities and serious injuries. I won't get much into the autonomous vehicles, but if I had to say one thing that's the silver bullet, I think it's going to be the autonomous vehicles that gets us to zero. And I know we've heard a lot of bad press, Tesla hitting and maybe even killing or maiming pedestrians, but I don't think the technology is there, but I think it's close. And I think this is what's going to get us to zero, is these autonomous vehicles eventually. Speed is the heart of a forgiving road transport system. It transcends all aspects of the safety. Without speed, there can be no movement. But with speed comes kinetic energy, and with kinetic energy and human error comes crashes, injuries, and even deaths. We've all seen the chart that shows if you get hit by a vehicle at 40 miles an hour, your chances of survival are 1 in 10. Where 20 miles less, at 20 miles an hour, your chances of survival are 9 out of 10. So we know that speed is a major function in kinetic energy and G-forces on the body. It also affects the stopping distance and the ability to brake or the length it takes to brake. So there's 2 ways that highway professionals could achieve credible speed limits. Stephanie mentioned one of them, and that is kind of a complete streets, to look at the complete streets and change the speed limits to match the user expectation and road environment. What we did in the past, our entire road system was based on mobility. And it made sense, right? Because we weren't really thinking in terms of safety. Primarily, we were thinking about mobility. And what the safe system approach says is that we don't need to compromise mobility or compromise safety for mobility. The second thing is we need to change the road environment to achieve the desired speeds. And you'll see that in the next few slides. And maybe you've even incorporated some of these features in your roadway system. Obviously, if we have speed through a typical intersection, like a gun barrel, we shouldn't expect anything other than a bullet going through it, right? And all too often, especially here in this state, we have roadways that were designed at 75 miles an hour or 65, and then we post them at 30 miles an hour, like this Kajak in Buffalo. And it's ridiculous. We can't expect people to drive a roadway that's designed at 80 miles an hour to go 30 miles an hour. And we certainly can't expect, and it's unfair to expect enforcement to enforce that speed. So what we need to do is change the geometrics consistent with the speed limit. You've seen this graph that in other presentations I've made, but it just shows the number of conflict points between a conventional intersection and a roundabout. Not only are they significantly reduced from 32 to 8, but the severity of crashes and the conflict points are eliminated completely in a roundabout versus a conventional intersection. You don't have those left turn crashes and those right angle crashes that tend to be more severe. We have, interesting note here, we have about, I'm guessing about 200 roundabouts throughout the state now. Compare and contrast that with a conventional intersection. We've had 2 fatalities at roundabouts over 10 to 20 years, period. How many fatalities would we have with conventional intersections with those same 200 over a 20-year period? Or even serious injuries. Now, I don't have the stats for serious injuries, but if it's consistent with the other stats throughout the state and throughout the world, we know that roundabouts reduce crashes by about 50 to 70%. And ostensibly, the severity of the crashes are significantly decreased because you're diverting that traffic and not hitting them at right angles. The thing that we've noticed is that people are more accepting of roundabouts. We don't hear the pushback, especially by the older driver community. People are more accepting. The more there are, the more that they're going to be accepted, and the more that people are going to learn how to drive them, navigate them, and so forth. So that's the good news. This was in Malta up here near Albany, where I live, and there was a lot of resentment about putting these in, especially by the older driver community. So we don't hear that kind of a pushback anymore. The newer things that are coming in terms of innovation are the mini roundabouts. And the advantages of mini roundabouts is that they have more than twice the capacity of the all-way stop control and about the same safety performance. But what they do is, they preserve a low-speed environment by diverting that traffic, not in a straight line, but diverting it off of that straight line. And it fits into existing right-of-way, and usually at a low cost. The one on the right is one that's being proposed in Long Island on Route 25. The one on the left is Route 31 and Route 298, I think in Onondaga County. I don't know, Dave, you can correct me on that. But in Michigan and other states, they're building them. They're replacing these signalized intersections and all-way stop control with these mini roundabouts. And they're very, very effective. Signs and signals, leading pedestrian interval, very low cost safety countermeasure, allowing the pedestrian to get establish kind of the right of way within the intersection before you release the vehicles, especially those right turning vehicles, the right on reds that are looking for gaps behind them and not paying attention to pedestrians in front of them. Road diets used very successfully here in New York, reducing those rear end crashes, increasing throughput, and yet maintaining more space for pedestrians, bicyclists, and parked vehicles and other road users. I know Hamburg just completed a road diet project just a few years ago. I don't know if this is it or not. And if I didn't say this, I meant to say of all the 200 roundabouts that we have constructed in this state, we've only had 2 fatalities. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. And the 2 fatalities, believe it or not, came at the same intersection, at the same roundabout in Hamburg, New York. So of the 200 roundabouts, we've only had 2 fatalities, and they came at the same roundabout in New York. Compare and contrast that with a conventional intersection, we would have had multiple tens of fatalities at those comparative conventional intersections.
Emmett, it was in Elbridge, New York, your intersection.
Say it again, Dave.
It was in Elbridge, New York.
Was that the mini roundabout?
Yeah, the mini roundabout. Yeah, off the thruway.
Okay.
Yep. And you got about 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Safe roads, we need to prevent crashes, keep impacts on the body at tolerable levels. Again, kinetic energy lower, speeds lower. Some of the things we need to do for redundancy, and we've done low-cost countermeasures such as rumble strips. We don't see much of these egregious safety issues much anymore on the state system. We still see them on the local system. But my challenge to you all this morning is, get a safety plan together, even if it's on the back of a napkin. It may be something more complex, but strive to have one project every year, every 5 years, whatever, that addresses egregious safety issues like this. And let that be your safety plan if you don't have one. You guys know better than anybody where safety is likely to be compromised, such as this. And who better to address it than you all? And drop-offs. Again, latent risks. We know that should someone get their tire over this drop-off, it's probably not going to end well. So we know where those problems are. We just need to address them as part of this systemic treatment. And things like this. We don't see this, again, too often, but we still see this on the local system a little bit more than the state system. And hopefully there'll be funding, as Administrator Pollock mentioned, there'll be funding available for this roadway departure action plan at the state level, much like there was for the pedestrian safety action plan. It's my thought that a lot of that money is going to be going to the locals to treat roadside issues like this systemically. Avoiding crashes involves separating users in space and in time, and increasing attentiveness and awareness, like through the rapid rectangular rapid flash beacons. We can also slow traffic by raised intersections and raised crosswalks, speed humps, and speed tables. And you might be saying, hey, Emmett, listen, have you forgotten where you live in? We have snow plows. But these pictures were taken in Portland, Maine, when we did a pedestrian safety audit there. And so they had plenty of raised crosswalks, speed tables, et cetera. And I assure you that they get as much or more snow than we do here. This was in Queens Boulevard, New York, a great case study where they've separated in space other road users from traffic. But I think the most interesting part of this is just the policy level decisions that went into this. About 20 years ago, they used to call Queens Boulevard the Boulevard of Death. There was 17 to 20, I think 17, 20 on average fatalities every single year on Queens Boulevard. We did a project some 15 years ago, and they've continued to do improvements on Queens Boulevard, but now they have less than one fatality a year. So when we talk about getting to zero, it's things like this. It's small things that add up that are going to reduce our overall fatality rate and serious injury rate. And that's why I am optimistic about the Toward Zero and safe systems approach. Managing speed is something that we need to do for managing kinetic energy, manipulating the mass and manipulating crash angles such as roundabouts and mini roundabouts. The other thing we can do is perceptual measures, very, very low cost in terms of roadway departure. And even though this is the same curve at the top and the bottom, which one looks sharper? Obviously, the one on the bottom looks much sharper. And as a matter of fact, through this trickery, this visual trickery, RPI did a study that showed that it reduced vehicle speeds between 5 and 7 miles an hour, which isn't huge, but that 5 and 7 miles an hour was at the upper end of the vehicles that were traveling through there. They were the ones that were speeding. So it slowed those high-end speeders down when they went through this. And the way they did this is by increasing those chevrons as you went through. So it looked like the curve was much sharper and people tended to slow much more. So all aspects, everyone's responsible through design, construction, maintenance. Even on Tuesday, I mentioned Matt and Gary. That's one of the first things they said was highlighting safety. And then vital post-crash actions, our EMS folks. We need to make sure that we get to crashes fast. We get to trauma centers quickly where they're needed. We need to clear the crashes quickly. We need to get legislation on the books here in New York for a quick clearance to get those vehicles off the road. And we need to make sure that when we investigate crashes, that all the details are there so the engineers and health, the DOH and the hospitals can gather that information and know how to respond more appropriately and quicker. And we need to adjudicate habitual criminals, not just for drinking and driving, but for, using your cell phone in work zones and speeding and so forth. Not just in a financial way, but I think in a more I'll leave it at that. We need to adjudicate the people that are habitual criminals. So if we can get to the folks that have crashes within the golden 10 minutes for pre-hospital care, and then obviously the golden hour from the time of the crash to the trauma center, we improve their chance of survival significantly. Early detection of incidents with enhanced 911, they're making it quicker response times through some of the technology like OnStar. They can actually provide certain services when they show up. They're prepared to treat certain injuries and relay those back to the trauma centers so that the appropriate doctor is there waiting in the emergency room, and they're not calling some specialist once the ambulance arrives. 18% of all incidents result in secondary crashes, so we need to reduce that response time, get the incidents off the roads. It's really a time-life race for survival. And then finally, the 5 safe system elements, if we look at the redundancy, keeping in mind that, with a redundant system of the responsibility for the road user and the technology in the vehicles, maintaining that safe speed through not just signing, but actual geometric features. Safe roads, including roadside design and clear zones and crosswalks and that sort of thing, and then partnering with the EMS folks to make sure that they are get there quick and get to the folks to the trauma centers quickly. So the traditional approach was to prevent crashes. The safe system approach says let's concentrate on death and serious injuries. It used to say we need to improve human behavior, but now the safe system approach says let's recognize that humans are going to make mistakes and that they do have limitations. The traditional approach was to control speed. Now we need to reduce the system's kinetic energy through our vehicle mass, through the vehicle materials, and through geometrics. Individuals are responsible was our traditional approach. And we'd say the hell with them. They were drinking and driving, they deserve to die. And now we say it's a shared responsibility between the vehicle manufacturers, the roadway owners, the users of the road, everybody. And then we used to just react based on crash history. We used to be reactive rather than proactive. And I suggest to you guys to look into this systemic approach to safety. I think it has a lot of dividends that can be paid. So implementing the safe system approach is our shared responsibility, and we all have a role. And I say we can't get it done without you guys, because 70% of the crashes happen on your network. So with that, Dave, I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's the last slide.
Okay, well, we're out of time pretty much, so I can't do all the questions, and we are going to miss you, Emmett, because you're retiring in September. You've got your countdown clock ready to go, I assume?
Oh, yes, I do.
And you're going to Aruba?
Yeah, I'm moving to Aruba November 30th.
Okay. So I did have one question. We had talked about answering some questions as you're getting ready for retirement, but I guess the one I would make sure you can answer, and that is, what should a local agency do to start building a safety program?
Well, as you know, Dave, because you've been involved, and I do want to thank you for all your involvement with all of the statewide programs, the PSAP, the some of the conferences we've had in getting the information out to your folks on safety and so forth. So I want to thank you for all that you've done to really promote safety and enhance safety through your partnerships. But the answer is, as you know, you participate in Chemung County and Wyoming County. I think the first thing to do is develop a safety plan. And it could be on the back of a napkin, and it could be as robust as having a GIS type database that identifies, your safety locations or your risk factors. And then once again, I would just say that, there's federal money available. Believe it or not, Chemung County developed their safety plan, and they got, I'm not saying this is a promise that it's going to happen in the future, but they got like $4 million to implement some of the countermeasures in their safety plan.
Well, having a plan gets you
Was
money.
develop a safety plan, and the federal highway can help in that effort.
Okay, cool. Well, I wish we had more time, but thanks for joining us. I know we'll see each other a few more times before you retire. And I want to thank everybody who stayed on. Thanks for coming to the Highway School. Next year, we're going to see you in the place that's behind me on the screen. Emmett, you'll have to come back up from Aruba and come visit us up at Ithaca College. Thanks again for everybody. If you would like to meet with your CHIPS representative, our last segment for this year's Highway School Good Roads Week is you can meet with your CHIPS representative. Go to the link that was sent to you, or you can go to the chat pod, click on that chat pod, and go visit with your CHIPS reps. And with that, it's the end of the school. It's been an interesting one, and we will definitely look forward to a more normal school next year. Take care, everybody. Be kind, be safe. Have a good day.